I think we can get started now. So good morning or afternoon. Welcome to this month's edition of the webinar series, Applied Analytics Success Stories. My name is Rajesh Tyagi, and I'm the organizer for this web series. Now, this seminar is an initiative of the Informs practice session. So before we start with the webinar, let me just spend a minute or so to give you a brief introduction to what the purpose of this practice session is. So the purpose is to advance the practice of analytics, operations research, and management sciences. And to support that, the chapter conducts a number of activities. So you have the 3 annual competitions, which are shown in blue font here. We also have 3 monthly activities, which are shown in the red font below that. So we have the Applied Analytics Success Stories webinar. So these are talks on real world problems that the speakers have encountered and have solved. We have the Sustaining Outstanding Analytics Organizations. This is where we have analytics managers talk about their organization, type of projects that they work on, and the type of people or skills they are looking to hire. We also have a virtual happy hour, which is more relaxed setting. Discussion topic varies, and you can find that out from the website, what the topic will be for that month. Again, these 3 are monthly seminars, and so please remember to register for these if you are interested. And if you like some of these webinars, we hope you will consider becoming a member of the practice session. So let me move on to now to the speaker here today. Just give me 1 second, please. Yeah. So title of today's presentation is Deep Transformation with Smart Supply Chain Digitization. We are very pleased to have Dr. David Simchi-Levi, Professor of Engineering Systems at MIT. David is also the head of the MIT Data Science Lab. He's one of the premier thought leaders in supply chain management and business analytics. Professor Simchi-Levi is the current editor-in-chief of Management Science Journal. He has won numerous Informs awards and has founded or co-founded 3 companies, LogicTools, OPS Rules, and Opalytics, which were acquired by IBM and Accenture. Just a quick note here that we will have a Q&A after the presentation. So during the talk, the viewers will be muted, but they can always post their questions during the talk using the Q&A button. At the end of the talk, David will answer those questions. And this session sort of will continue till about 1:30. So we'll have a talk going till about 12:45, and then David will start answering questions and will continue all the way up to about 1:30. So with that, let me hand over to the speaker. All yours, David.
Great, thank you, Rajesh, for a nice introduction. If you can stop sharing, I will try to share my perfect. Let me see if I can share. Okay. Do you see my slides?
I see that, yes.
Just 1 second. To this, and let me also bring a pointer. Okay. All right, I think you can, oops. All right. Hi, everybody. I'm David Simchi-Levi. I'm on the faculty at MIT, and today I will share with you recent work that I have done with a number of companies on smart supply chain digitization. It's appropriate to start this talk by describing the environment at MIT that led to this work. At MIT, I lead the data science lab that bring together a variety of companies an MIT faculty, PhD students, postdoc, research scientists, to collaborate on some of the most important challenging problems that these companies have by bringing together data, models, and analytics. The data science lab is cross-industry. We have companies in oil and gas, retail, financial services, insurance, airline, and the like. It has a global footprint. We have companies, partners in, of course, North America, Europe, Asia, and Latin America. Let me give you a few examples of the type of work that we have done in supply chain resiliency. This is a concept that my team at MIT developed after the tsunami in Japan and the flood in Thailand. That was published in Harvard Business Review and then follow-up papers in a variety of journals. This was implemented initially at the Ford Motor Company, later on at high-tech and telecommunication companies. But after the beginning of the pandemic, Accenture signed a partnership with MIT to scale this technology and implement it across a variety of industries. It was already implemented, for example, at Sigma, which is a large food manufacturing company in Europe and Latin America. We have done a lot of work at the lab on price optimization. Everybody's familiar with Groupon. We optimize pricing decision for Groupon in work that we've done 3-4 years ago. Ulala, which is an online retailer. Coppel, which is a brick and mortar retailer in Mexico. Zalando. Zalando is considered the largest online fashion retailer in Europe. We have been collaborating with them over the last 3 years for optimizing price across all their product. A company like BTEC, think about BTEC like Best Buy of the Middle East, and Oracle, which is a software company where we have designed new algorithm for price optimization. Some of our work focus not only on price optimization in this phase, but personalized offering. If you fly today from London to Paris and you buy your airline ticket, we are not involved, but once you buy the ticket, our system kicks in and offer ancillary product, priority boarding, car rental, hotels, and the like, and the offers that you will get is not necessarily the offers that I will receive. In this space, we have seen also companies in the insurance industry using our technology for customized offering. We have done a lot of work on inventory, transportation, and procurement for software company like Blue Yonder, which is considered in supply chain the largest software company in the market. Home Depot, again, Accenture, and if you are familiar with Mango, it's a well-known fashion retailer headquartered in Spain. A lot of work on online resource allocation with companies like IBM and Alibaba. Supply chain digitization that I will speak about here. Some of the work was done in collaboration with Accenture. I cannot mention the names of companies that we have implemented our technology, but you will see a few examples during my talk. And then a lot of work during the pandemic on sales forecast for a company like AB InBev, for again Zalando and the like. Today, I'm going to focus on supply chain digitization. And my starting point is going to be focusing on perception versus reality. The perception about supply chain digitization is that it requires extensive investment in infrastructure, that it requires instrumentation of every facility and product, automation of every process, and tracking all or across all supply chain partners. The typical assumption that executives make about supply chain digitization is that it's going to take 3 to 5 years and requires tens and tens of millions of dollars. What we have found is that a company can achieve most of the benefit of supply chain digitization with moderate financial investment, with by combining available data, advanced analytics, and some automation, and by modifying existing processes and designing some new processes. We have found this to be the case in implementation in a variety of industries. Today, I'll focus on CPG, but what I will describe here have been applied in CPG, consumer packaged goods, in fashion retailing, in PC manufacturing, and in appliance manufacturing, in the appliance and manufacturing industry. So we have seen this to be successful across a variety of industry. What I want to describe is what we have done and what is a journey that we took to successfully embed a digital supply chain. In this process, working across different companies, we have identified 4 key capabilities that are essential for successful implementation. The first capability is moving away from what companies call consensus forecast, where each functional area will come with its own forecast, and then they will meet in a consensus discussion to agree on a compromise. It's not necessarily clear that this compromise correctly represents market demand, but that's what they will attempt to do. We will focus on transforming this process from a consensus forecast to a process where there is a single view of customer demand generated through data, analytics, and automation. The second capability that I will focus on is moving away from one-size-fits-all supply chain strategy and into a supply chain segmentation strategy, where you segment product and customers into clusters, and associated with each cluster, there is a unique supply chain strategy. Of course, while we segment supply chain customers and product, we will need to build synergies across the different segments. Again, we will show how data analytics and automation help us segment and manage the supply chain effectively. The unified view of demand and the supply chain segmentation will feed into what I call smart SNOP, or smart sales and operation planning. SNOP is a process that companies have been using since the early 90s. So this is not new. What is new is the ability to use data and analytics to transform this process. SNOP is about generating a plan that allows us to continuously balance supply and demand. Smart execution is about identifying deviation from the plan, supply and demand disruption, and quickly responding to this deviation or disruption. As I mentioned, all these processes will be driven by data, analytics, and automation. And in some cases, as you will see, it requires new organizational structure. So I'm going to talk today both about the analytics, about the processes, as well as about organizational structure. So here is what I'm planning to cover. I will start with unified view of demand, then talk about supply chain segmentation. Once we understand these 2 processes, we'll focus on smart SNOP, or smart planning, and smart execution, and finally, requirement for success. A couple of notes on the references on the right-hand side. Some of the ideas that I will talk about today have appeared in my book, Operations Rules, and the Harvard Business Review article published in 2014 on supply chain resiliency. Many of the ideas that I will cover here appear in the book, Designing and Managing the Supply Chain, that the fourth edition that was published, just released to the market this month. In this case, in the discussion about the 4 topics that I mentioned, I will use the example of implementation at a large consumer packaged good manufacturing company. So a little bit of a background about the company. It's a global company with large revenue. They serve, the CPG serve many retailers. They have a variety of brands, 70 plus brands and thousands of SKUs. The company, at least in North America, has many manufacturing facilities and distribution centers. The supply chain strategy is focused on one-size-fits-all strategy, just one strategy emphasizing basically efficiency in their supply chain. Forecasting, as is typical to that industry, is done through or by consensus. Each functional area will have its own forecast, and they will agree on a compromise. Processes are manual and time-consuming. Inventory and waste are large, so cost they consider is a challenge, and managing cost is an important objective of part of this project. So let me start with a discussion of unified view of demand. And a good way to start is to highlight what I emphasized earlier about consensus forecast. For this company, this CPG, as well as many similar companies, each functional area, and by functional area, I refer to finance, supply chain, sales, trade and promotion, will generate its own forecast. Then they come together in a consensus meeting to agree on a compromise. When they generate the forecast, they use traditional statistical techniques like moving average or exponential smoothing or time series analysis. And they will use intuition to identify or to highlight what drive revenue, what drive profit for a specific product in a specific region. Our focus is going to be different. We are going to combine 4 sources of data. As you will see, some of it is internal, other are external, some of it is structured, a lot of it is unstructured. We are going to combine this with machine learning techniques that will help us generate a unified view of demand, and will decompose the forecast into the main building blocks that explain why we see an increase in sales for this product in this region during that period of time, whereas we see a decrease in sales for another product. As you are listening to this process, keep in mind that what I'm trying to highlight is a change in the company focus from whatever they did into a customer-centric supply chain strategy or demand-driven supply chain strategy. Now, this concept is not new. This concept has been around for a long period of time. But until recently, it was mostly boxes on a PowerPoint. For the first time, with data, with digitization, analytics, and automation, this concept is a reality that I'm going to describe. So what are the data sources that we are using? As I mentioned, we are using 4 different sources of data. Internal data, What are internal data? Internal data includes, of course, product characteristics, pricing, promotion, and discounts, as well as shipments from the CPG to the retailer, or if you will, orders from the retailer to the CPG. We use consumer data. When available, we use point of sale information, but you will be surprised how many, the small numbers of retailers who provide the CPG with point of sale data. As a result, we had to complement the point of sale data with syndicated data from companies like IRI and Nielsen. We use macroeconomic information like quarterly GDP, purchasing manager index, customer purchasing index, and the like. And finally, we use a variety of external data, Google Trends, social media information, information about weather conditions, pandemic information during the pandemic. And if anybody is interested, we developed a new way of incorporating pandemic information into the forecast. And finally, information about competitor price. The problem, the challenge with competitor price when you use it for generating a forecast is we know competitor price today. We also have historical information about competitor price. But when we generate a forecast, for example, for this retailer, we generate a forecast for the next 80 weeks, week by week, SKU by SKU. The competition is not telling us what the competitor is going to do a month from now, 3 months from now, or 6 months from now. As a result, we need to develop an engine within our technology that will predict future behavior of the competition. Once we have the data, we develop a circular process, a unified view of demand that allow us to generate a single signal used by financial planning, sales planning, trade, price and promotion, as well as supply planning. So what is this process? I'm describing the circular process here, but I will provide the detail of the process in the next couple of slides. Notice that this process has 5 steps. The first step is all about generating the forecast of consumption, of consumer demand, what the CPG is predicting, the retailer will face in the market, SKU by SKU, retailer by retailer, week by week. For this purpose, I'm using the data that I just described, but only part of it. What am I using? I'm using, of course, information about product characteristics. I'm using point of sales or IRI data or syndicated data, whether it's IRI or Nielsen. And then I'm using microeconomics data as well as external data to generate the CPG best understanding of consumption, of what the retailer will face in the market. Once I have information about consumer demand, meaning the forecast we generated of consumption, we move to step 2 of the process, which is focused on generating a forecast of what the retailer will order from the CPG, from the manufacturer. For this purpose, we will combine 2 sources of information. One is the forecast generated in step 1 of market demand, and the second one, historical information about orders from the retailer to the manufacturer to generate our best understanding, the CPG best understanding of what the retailer will order in the future from the CPG. And remember, this is retailer by retailer, SKU by SKU, week by week forecast. When the retailer places an order, the retailer, of course, has no idea what business constraints the CPG has. For example, the retailer does not know what is available inventory, or what is, or finished goods, or raw material. The retailer does not know lead time, production capacity. And so we feed our forecast of step 2 into an optimization tool that generates a supply plan, week by week, SKU by SKU. And this supply plan can be aggregated in order to generate a financial plan. What is a financial plan? A financial plan aggregates our supply plan, which is at the week level and at the SKU level, into a monthly financial plan that is done across all SKUs within one business unit. So for each business unit, now we have a financial plan driven by the supply plan generated in step 3. And finally, once we have a financial plan, we can compare it with a target and adjust our trade plan. We compare it with a target and we see, are we ahead of the target? So maybe we can reduce some of our marketing and promotion and discounting plans. Or are we way behind? We need to adjust our marketing, discounting, and promotion to catch up. These are the 5 steps that I refer to as the circular process. You notice that in this process, I use a lot of data, in fact, 4 sources of data. I use machine learning algorithm in step 1 and step 2. I use optimization technology in step 3. Step 4 is just an approach that moves us from bottom, from the SKU level forecast to the business unit forecast, from the week level forecast into the monthly financial plan. And step 5 is making sure that our trade plan is consistent with the results that we see from step 4. Of course, when you do that, there are lots of questions that executives ask. The first that they ask is, what is a forecast accuracy? So let me give you our experience about forecast accuracy associated with this process. Now I'm going to break it down into the individual component. Forecast accuracy in step 1. Remember what we are doing in step 1. In step 1, we are generating a forecast of market demand, of consumption. This is the CPG best understanding of what each retailer will face for the next 80 weeks, week by week, SKU by SKU. Our forecast accuracy, 1 month out. So I'm measuring a forecast accuracy, a forecast generated today. I'm measuring the accuracy of this forecast in week 5, week 6, week 7, and week 8. Our forecast accuracy was incredibly high. And we know why. This is related to the bullwhip effect. What is incredibly high in this environment? We are talking about consumption level forecast, where forecast accuracy was about 85%. And the reason we start here with consumption is because we know variability in market demand is much lower than variability in retailer orders. We use this information to generate our forecast of what the retailer will order. Here I have a baseline. For consumption, I don't have a baseline because the CPG never did it. But for retailer order, consensus forecast was used to generate. Their forecast accuracy was about 60%. Our forecast accuracy, depending on the SKU and depending on the retailer, increased it from 60 to 80%. So we are talking about dramatic improvement in forecast accuracy. What about the financial plan? Remember, the financial plan is done at an aggregated level, aggregating all weeks within a month, aggregating all SKUs within a business unit, measuring forecast accuracy 1 month out. Forecast accuracy for the financial plan was about 96 or 97%. We have applied this, as I mentioned, in a number of companies. We saw the same level of forecast accuracy. Frequency. In the previous approach that the company was using, consensus forecast, because the process was manual, because the process was require a lot of discussion between the different functional areas, it typically took a month to arrive at a consensus forecast. Because this process, the new process that I'm describing, is completely automated, it takes about a week to complete. And in fact, depending on the application, we see some cases where it's used twice a week. I talked about bottom-up approach that we are using in the financial plan. But one important question that the executive at this company asked is, when we look at your forecast, we need to understand what drives the forecast. And the question is important because no executive is going to follow a forecast generated by a black box unless they understand what drives the forecast. And so an important part of our development was around explainability. We basically develop an approach that allows us to take a forecast for a specific SKU in a specific region, for a specific, for example, week, and decompose it into its basic ingredients, right? And there are various ways to do this. There is nothing here earth-shaking, but it's an important part of unified view of demand. The second question that executive asked us, not only we want to understand what drive our forecast, but we need to understand why the forecast you generated this week for a specific product in a specific region for a specific, say, month or time period is different than the forecast that you gave me 2 weeks ago or 3 weeks ago. Now, remember that two forecasts are the same if they are within the margin of error. Here I'm showing two different forecasts. You can see, for example, that in where my laser pointer is, the confidence intervals overlap, so there is nothing to explain. But in this area, where my laser pointer is, the confidence intervals are different, and as a result, one needs to explain the difference between the different forecasts. A lot of time, what we found is that the difference is driven by new input data that we have used. We have updated the 4 sources of data that I mentioned. All of a sudden, we are generating today a forecast different than before. Finally, they ask, hey, all is good, but we don't understand. Reflecting on the last couple of weeks, your forecast is different than what we see. Of course, if we are within margin of error, that's all good. But remember that actual or realized sale is affected by the way decisions are made. And the retailer execution is not transparent to the CPG. And so in this case of the CPG, what difference between forecast and actual drove is an investigation of how decisions were made for different products at different locations. Finally, one important challenge here is how do you ensure that all the functional areas, remember, finance, supply chain, sales, trade, and promotion, everybody is following the same unified view of demand. This is clearly an interdisciplinary process. And so what we did was to establish a forecasting center of excellence that brings the different functional areas to agree on the data. Once they agree on the data, the automation takes over and generate the different forecasts following the steps of the circular process described at the bottom. This brings us to discuss supply chain segmentation. Remember, this company was focusing until recently on a one-size-fits-all strategy, but the point that we made in this and other implementation is that they have thousands of products with different characteristics. Retailers have different requirements. Just to illustrate this, Walmart recently announced a different requirement for service level. They increased their on-time and in-full requirement for whatever it was before by about 10 percentage points. That's huge. And so the way you serve a retailer like Walmart is going to be different than the way you serve a retailer like Kroger. And of course, there are multiple and conflicting objectives that you need to deal with. And so the idea behind supply chain segmentation is to look at the detailed characteristic by product, by retailer. For example, for each product by retailer, we look at sales velocity, think about this as volume, sales variability, cost, price, margin. In this case of the retailer, we started with about 40 different features. The analytics allow us to identify among these 40 features, what are the dominating features that we need to use. I'll show you what they are. And the dominating features allow us to segment the supply chain and to design an appropriate supply chain strategy for each segment. So this is a general framework. I'm waving a little bit my hands, but let me show you detail. Using the data that we have, we focus on 3 drivers. Remember, I started with 40 different features, but the data suggested that among the 40 features, the most important features that affect the supply chain strategy are 3: volume by SKU, by retailer, volatility in market demand, and product margin. Why is this 3? Because they are directly related to the risk associated with each SKU. Obviously, the higher the volatility, the more risky it is because it's very difficult to forecast. Margin. The higher the margin, the more risky the product is because when I lose an order, bigger impact on bottom line. Volume is inversely proportional to risk. The higher the volume, the lower the risk. If I lose an order as a proportion of the total volume, the impact is much lower. So taking these 3 drivers, we can start understanding the supply chain segmentation that was implemented. To see that, look at the framework that I have on this slide. On the X coordinate, I'm focusing on volatility, SKU by SKU, retailer by retailer. So from low volatility to high volatility. On the Y coordinate, I'm looking at volume, from low volume to high volume. Let's start with box 1. Box 1 represents all the SKU retailer combination where volatility is very high. I cannot predict very well. Here, as a result, I focus on a pull strategy, position inventory in centralized location, and ship items from the centralized locations that allow you to aggregate across many different retailers through cross-dock facilities to retailer. This allows us to better manage inventory because of the pooling effect, and therefore allow us to cut, for example, inventory. Box 2 is completely different. Box 2 is characterized by low level of volatility and high volume. This is where we can predict very well. As a result, we apply a push-based supply chain strategy where we position inventory close to market demand in regional distribution center. The box at the bottom left-hand side has conflicting indicator. On the one hand, volatility is low, that's great. But on the other hand, volume is low, that's a little bit of a problem because if you make a mistake in an order, bigger impact on bottom line. That's where we apply margin. We split this box into 2 segments. The high margin are the risky product. This is where we position inventory in centralized location and in regional distribution center, whereas low margin products are positioned in regional distribution center, but positioned such that we can achieve the response times that the company is committing to the client. One way to think about our strategy is to look at the 4 segments here. The high volatility product are positioned in central distribution center and through cost-dock facilities are delivered to the retailers. The low volatility, high volume product are product where I can predict very well. These products are positioned in RDCs and from there quickly deliver to the customer. Low volatility, low volume product with high margin, we use a hybrid approach where finished goods is positioned both at central distribution centers and regional distribution facilities. And finally, the low margin products are positioned in RDCs. The number of RDCs in this case applied in the bottom segment is always a function of the retailer delivery requirement, which allow us to consolidate a little bit and therefore reduce our inventory cost. One way to understand what we are doing is to look at this trade-off between efficiency and responsiveness. On the X coordinate, I'm focusing on responsiveness from short response time to long response time. And on the Y coordinate, I am focusing on efficiency from low cost to high cost. And the trade-off between the two is clear. When I emphasize short response time, cost is high. When I emphasize low cost, it typically takes longer to respond to customer order. And a company strategy is a point along this trade-off. What we are doing by bringing together data and analytics and focusing on unified view of demand and focusing on supply chain segmentation is to push the trade-off curve in a direction of improvement. What are the implications? The implications are clear. It allows us to position different segments in different locations, and as a result, squeeze as much of performance as possible. For example, remember segment number one, you can see it at the bottom left-hand side. Segment number one is the high volatility segment. This segment is positioned, product in this segment are positioned at central distribution center, which means that it allows us to reduce inventory costs dramatically, but it takes, of course, longer to respond to an order by the retailer. Box number two, which is the box with low volatility and high volume, this is where we can predict. As a result, we are positioning this product very close to market demand. We cut response time dramatically. It also allows us to dramatically reduce transportation costs because we ship fully loaded truck. But when I look at inventory will be higher because we are not benefiting from a lot from the pooling effect. Here is what we found in multiple implementation. Forecast accuracy was improved by 10 to 30%. Remember, in our discussion about the unified view of demand for this CPG, I mentioned an improvement by 20 percentage points. It allows us, therefore, to increase service level, which implies better customer experience. It allows us to cut lost sale, which implies a revenue increase. And it allows us to reduce inventory and waste, which imply cost saving. Let me quickly go through the two remaining capabilities that I mentioned. One is smart SNOP, and the second one is smart execution. And let's start with smart SNOP. Remember that SNOP is an old process. It's a process that was that companies started following in the early 90s. It's a process that allows companies to continuously balance supply and demand. But the traditional approach is to use this as an extension of the consensus forecast. It's mostly common sense and experience driven. It's a very long process because it's manual. And the role of executive is clear. Different executive will sit in around the table and will push for their own objective. And then through the discussion, they will try to find a compromise between different plans coming from different functional areas. Our process brings together engineering for new product introduction, finance, operation or supply chain, sales and sourcing. It's integrated with the circular process. It's completely automated. What is the role of executive? The role of executive is not to decide what the plan is. The role of executive is to identify was the data, I mentioned it earlier, an input parameter. Let me give an example. They will decide, hey, in the Midwest, our objective for this business unit or for this product category is to grow our market share. And then the optimizer will find, given this objective, here is what the supply plan should be. Or in a different region for specific product category, the executive agree, we are going to focus on increasing our margin, not necessarily on growing market share, because we already are very competitive in that market. Then this input drives the supply plan generated in this process. The point is, because the process is completely automated, it allows executives to step back, look at what they are trying to do, and decide what kind of targets and input parameters they should apply. Smart execution, some people will call it control tower, complement smart SNOP, and it's focusing on identifying deviation from the plan or supply and demand disruption. Let me bring a new concept to the discussion. Typically, companies focus on key performance indicator, which monitors the current performance of the supply chain. With smart execution, we not only focus on the current performance of the supply chain, we also focus on the future performance of the supply chain. What we are trying to predict what is likely going to happen in the near future if we don't make any change, and then if we see a problem, we identify corrective action. For that reason, I refer to this performance measure as KPPs, or key performance predictor. We will predict, as you will see in a second, what is the status, what is the state of the supply chain 6 weeks from now. And if we see, hey, right now, the service level is according to expectation, but 6 weeks from now, service level is going to drop significantly, then we identify what action we need to take today to correct future problems that we have indicated by the system. Let me give you 2 examples. Right now, we are observing that by looking at KPI, everything is in order. But shipment data suggests that lead time from one of our suppliers is going to increase. The analytics identify that this increase in lead time will create a service problem in the Midwest 3 weeks from now. And the automation here refers to optimization, suggests what is the best way to respond. Should we expedite from a different region? Should we switch to a secondary supplier, and so forth and so on. Production shutdown. Production shutdown is a beautiful example to illustrate this, because this is what happened last year, and this is what I used in a Harvard Business Review article that I published in February of last year to predict the impact of COVID-19 on global supply chain in mid-March. And so what I did, I looked at data from Asia, right? In this example, I have an example of an earthquake that has damaged a manufacturing facility in Thailand. I use the analytics to predict that because of this event, we will have a shutdown of manufacturing and assembly facilities in North America. And then you can use automation to effectively identify what is the best mitigation strategy that you need to take now to avoid shortage of raw material and components 5 weeks from now. So to compare smart SNOP with smart execution, let's look at 5 dimensions. The primary purpose of smart planning or smart SNOP is to develop a supply plan, typically for the next 80 weeks. Smart execution is about quick response. And so the time horizon is completely different. One is in the case of CPG, it's 80 weeks. Some other cases, it was 50 weeks. In smart execution, it's all about short term, the next couple of weeks, typically up to 6 weeks. The process in SNOP is discrete, bi-weekly or weekly. Sometimes, in the case of a fashion retailer, we have seen it used twice a week. Execution is a continuous process, monitoring continuously the state of the supply chain and recommending action. In SNOP, we use historical data. In execution, we use real-time data. And finally, the objective of the prediction step in SNOP is predicting demand. In execution, it's all about KPPs. Let me close by reporting what I found are key requirements for success. Obviously, these types of transformation require data and technology. It requires people with the right expertise beyond supply chain. It's not that we are replacing supply chain people with automation. It's that we are complementing supply chain people with data scientists to help us leverage the data that companies have. And I'm emphasizing at the bottom right-hand side, the need to combine art and science. Science is all the data science that I talked about, the machine learning and the optimization. Art is a supply chain experience, supply chain knowledge, supply chain intuition that executives have. Combining these two allow companies to make a big impact on bottom line. So what are the key requirements that allow companies to have a successful digital transformation journey? What I have followed are the following 5 steps. First, start with the vision. Identify the baseline, where you are. Identify where you want to go, the North Star, and develop a plan for closing the gap. Nobody is going to agree for a full transformation unless you demonstrated the value. But you have a lot of historical data that you can use to demonstrate the value by showing, hey, I can improve forecast accuracy. This will allow us to reduce inventory by how much, eliminate lost sale by how much, increase service level, and so forth and so on. So demonstrating the value is a very important part of the process. Developing the operating model, remember the circular process that I mentioned. Considering talent strategy is a critical part of this transformation, because most companies that I've worked with are not Facebook, are not Amazon, are not Google. Recruiting, mentoring, promoting data scientists is an important part of the success story. And finally, identify the appropriate organizational structure. And I talked a little bit about that during this talk, emphasizing, for example, the need for a forecasting center of excellence. Let me pause here and see if there are comments, suggestions, or questions. Rajesh?
Yes, David, if you can hit on the Q&A button, there is a question there. And Beth, if you can open it to all the viewers also, if they want to ask any questions.
Yeah. So the question that I see here, the two terms, digitization and digitalization, have been used interchangeably in the literature. I have not, I don't have a good answer to this question. I have focused all my work on digitization, and by this, I mean the framework that I described here. I'm not sure what other people have referred to. Are there other comments or questions?
Beth, is this open to people on the call?
Okay. I think we lost Beth, maybe. Maybe people can unmute themselves.
No,
no,
I don't think it allows them to unmute, but if they can type in the Q&A button, they can have the question. So let me, while they do that, or Beth, we can catch Beth. Let me ask one question. So, I mean, you talked about demonstrating value, and to me, the toughest part is convincing a client that, hey, look, you are proposing a system which is going to be better than what they're currently doing, and it's a very tough sell. How do you convince them that your solution would be better? Do you do any back testing?
Yes.
With the historical data? Yes.
Very good question. The demonstrating value in this supply chain is all about back testing. And the process is very simple. There is nothing magic about what I'm describing. You take the historical data, you split it into training and testing, and you train whatever algorithm you have on one data. And then you show, hey, when I apply the new process, here is the accuracy that I'm getting in terms of market consumption. Remember, there's 3 different forecasts. Here is the accuracy that I'm getting in terms of market consumption. Here is the accuracy that I'm getting in terms of what the retailer order. And here is the accuracy that I'm getting in terms of the financial plan. And you compare it with what the company has been doing. And this allows us to hopefully demonstrate value to the client. Another question, somebody was asking about step 4 implementer. Does it contain a lot of partial interlink, or does it work like a software? So step 4, remember, is generating the, I hope I'm referring to the right step that you are talking about. Step 4 is a financial plan. The financial plan, as I mentioned, is completely automated. You're asking about all steps. So when you focus on all steps, it's completely integrated through, of course, a variety of machine learning algorithms, as well as pipelines that push the output from step 1 into an input to step 2, the output of step 2 into step 3. So this is completely automated. There is no, it's basically a software installation that combine algorithms and data to allow us to smoothly move from one step to another. Somebody is asking about blockchain, whether blockchain can be used in food supply chain. There is a lot of discussion about blockchain. I am not, first, let me highlight, I'm not an expert in blockchain, so I don't want to pretend that I have done a lot of work in, but from the work that I have done, from the work that I've done in blockchain, I see blockchain playing a role only in case, at least playing an important role, only in supply chain where the company switch from one supplier to another supplier very frequently. So think about agriculture products, think about farmers. Here, one time you use this farmer and another time you use another farmer. That's where you need a trusted supply chain. That's where you need a blockchain type of technology. But in the CPG companies that I am talking about here, the supplier set was very stable. They don't switch very frequently from one supplier to another. And so the supply chain is highly trusted. The need for blockchain is minimal. Going back to Nico's question about the 4 steps, you're asking whether the 4 steps are linked. The 4 steps are linked together in the ways that I described. An input from one goes straight into, from one step goes straight into another step, so that we can leverage both the power of the technology, but also the speed of the technology in our business.
So, David, let me just follow up on that Nico's question. So when you say they're all automatically linked,
Yes.
do you, at least in the beginning, have any touch points with the customer after each step where they say, look, yes, output of this step makes sense? Or, well, maybe at least in the beginning, before your models are fully developed, maybe there is some information missing that you were not aware of, where you allow customers to maybe make some edits to it?
Yeah, Rajesh, it's a great point. What I'm describing in my answer to Nikos is the end result, completely integrated. Okay. But in every step, we have worked directly with the, in this example, with the CPG data scientist. Why? Because we use some data, and real example. And the data scientist will look at it and say, oh, makes sense, this looks good. And then they will talk to the functional areas and say, hey, you're missing an important input. Let me give you an example of an important input that they mentioned. Said, from time to time, for specific product, a given retailer will change how many stores sell the product. We need this flexibility to change the number of stores, because the number of stores has a big impact on demand. And if you are not allowing us to include this as an input parameter, we are going to missing the opportunity to generate an effective forecast. And so each step was developed, shown to the data science, showing to the functional areas. And in each step, we had to adjust some of the input parameters, maybe some steps, some of the business constraints, in order to have something that is fully consistent with the client expectation. Different client, different requirements. But the process that I'm describing was the same.
And roughly how long would you say the process will take before, once you start to where they're completely satisfied with the automated process?
So if you're only talking about unified view of demand, we are talking about a process. Of course, it depends on what they have in place, but we are talking about a process that takes 4, 5, 6 months. In the initial implementation of this at the CPG, it took about 12 months. But now that we have done this multiple times, there is a learning, of course, that we have that allow us to cut the time to develop. This is not about the entire 4 capabilities. I'm only focusing in your question about the unified view of demand.
Okay, fair enough. Any other questions? Sorry, I guess people were not able to ask directly. And I think we have answered all the questions.
Yep.
That were typed. So maybe we'll just stop here. Just want to let the audience know that this session is being taped and it will be posted in about a week's time. You know, where you registered on the page, I guess there'll be a link to the YouTube posting of this session. Will take about 1 week's time. And again, if you have any comments about this webinar series, either this one or any ideas about this one, you can send me an email on this one. And David, I just want to thank you again. This was a very educational session. I totally really enjoyed your presentation. Thank you very much for taking time to give us this webinar, very engaging webinar. Really appreciate your time.
Thank you, and thank you everybody for joining us. If you have any question about what I described, you can send me an email either through Rajesh or directly. Thank you.
Okay, all right. Thank you very much, Dave. Bye.